What's up, guys? It's Storm here. Today I wanted to go over Luffy versus Kizaru because of the countless arguments about the fight. I feel like there are a lot of conflicting opinions about it, which either don't really make sense or aren't supported by the actual story. I also do want to say that I have a Discord that you guys can interact with me in. So like if you disagree with something I've said in the past, or you just want to know my specific opinion on like a topic, the link for that will be in the description below. So before we start, I want to paint a little bit of a picture of both Luffy and Kizaru shortly before their fight begins. The first section of the Egghead Island arc has Luffy fighting the Seraphim, who he couldn't damage despite his efforts, which leads to him having slight injuries over the course of the battle. But overall, he seems fine. At worst, maybe he's like a little bit injured from yesterday. Overall, his main goal is to escape from the island with Vegapunk and his crew. On Kizaru's end, we see he has a checklist given to him by Saturn of all the things he has to protect, and the notion that the more the Marines destroy on this island, the more they're going to lose. This being the usual standard for the Admirals, where they can't use their majorly destructive abilities, with this island being a step above due to it housing the Punk Records and the Mother Flame power plant. Kizaru also says on his checklist is to eliminate Vegapunk, which the Viva card specifically notes that this was just to admonish his wavering and inner conflict. So once again, we're running with an Admiral who has muscle nerf, which is not going to be the first or last time we will in this story or on this channel. So Kizaru is not operating at his maximum potential due to these factors. When Kizaru first enters the island, Luffy senses his presence, and while he's shivering and sweating, he says someone strong is here. When he comes face to face with him, Luffy immediately charges and kicks him using Conqueror's Infusion. He mentions that compared to 2 years ago, he and his crew are 100 times stronger now, which the Viva card backs up, saying that 2 years ago all Luffy could do was run away, but the current Luffy is 100 times stronger. This statement is a callback to what Shaki said about Rayleigh in comparison to the Straw Hat crew during the Sabo Ojiji Archipelago arc. With Luffy being his student, Kizaru was kind of a test, not only for Luffy to change the results of what happened to him 2 years ago, but it's also a direct comparison of Luffy to his teacher / master in terms of performance. The next time we cut back, we see Gear 4 Snake Man Luffy attacking Kizaru, with Kizaru defending himself while shooting light beams at Luffy. Kizaru compliments Luffy and he says he can see why Luffy was able to defeat Kaido. Kizaru was able to slip away before Luffy can register him, and he accelerates beyond light speed to kick him through the Vega Force 1 robot and the Frontier Dome barrier. Something weird about this scene is that people call this a one-shot, but it clearly isn't due to the fact that Luffy was able to quickly rebound and return before the end of this same chapter. Luffy did get overpowered by Kizaru here, but it's clear that he maintained his consciousness and he endured that attack. When he does return, he says that going through the Frontier Dome barrier twice was so painful, he thought he was going to die. Which is a funny statement I've heard to gas Kizaru, because this barrier is based on his like Devil Fruit abilities. The issue with this barrier is that we've seen much weaker characters than Luffy go through it and kind of walk around fine afterwards. Kaku, Bonnie, and Edison have all passed through this barrier. In Edison's case, he isn't even a combatant and he projected himself taking like 78% external damage despite already being injured before jumping into the 100% dome barrier. I think it's pretty clear that Luffy was just exaggerating the damage he took from the barrier, and he wasn't actually severely injured for the rest of his fight with Kizaru. When Luffy returns, he's in Gear 5, which Kizaru recognizes, likely from Luffy's bounty poster and his familiarity with Nika from Kuma's stories. While giant-sized, Luffy grabs Kizaru and decides to throw him off the island in order to allow his friends to escape, with Usopp saying that Luffy is holding off Kizaru. I'll come back to this Luffy throwing Kizaru scene later in the video as it's pretty important. Kizaru returns with clones to attack Luffy as his real body closes in on Vegapunk, which the Viva card notes as him being able to adapt to Gear 5's unpredictable fighting style due to his extensive battle experience. The clones' Ama no Murakumo swords show the capability to damage Luffy, and they actually draw blood from him right before he takes them all out. When Kizaru's real body shoots a beam at Vegapunk's tank, we see Luffy eat a laser and endure it bursting from within his body. Pause. Next chapter, we see them in close quarters combat, huffing at each other, looking pretty comparable, and explicitly saying the goals of this fight to one another. With Kizaru saying he can't spend all of his time on Luffy due to his mission, and Luffy saying it's his mission to force Kizaru to spend his time on him. Both of them are bruised up in this scene, which kind of implies them landing hits on one another in this off-screen section of the fight. Kizaru once again shows his fruit's capability to immediately escape Luffy's grasp with raw speed, which is something mentioned in his first Reaver card. His ability is very effective for both evasion and movement, so it's impossible to grasp even one single of his movements without being a proficient Haki user. Kizaru's ability is basically a speed fruit first, which allows him to evade and move incredibly quickly, so it makes sense as to why he can dash away from Luffy more than once. Kizaru shoots another laser at Vegapunk but misses and hits the cloud track instead, just in time for Luffy to arrive. Luffy is huffing and Kizaru claims that Luffy must be reaching his limit by now, which may imply Luffy was showing signs earlier in the fight when both parties were wheezing in their exchange. When Luffy muscles up his arm to attack Kizaru, Kizaru blasts a laser at him, which in the manga clearly hits Luffy as a whack sound effect is present, and Luffy's sentence is interrupted by a oomph as he said. He endures it and manages to use the force of the attack to amp his own, using Star Gun to hit Kizaru in the head. This is a Gear 5, muscled up, Conqueror's infused flame attack that utilizes Luffy's Paramecia Awakening-like properties, and this hits Kizaru in the head. While being hit by this, Kizaru internally says that he is seeing stars, or that this isn't good, depending on the translation. This sends Kizaru flying as Luffy says he has hit his limit and turns into an old man, resulting in a pseudo double knockout. Kizaru says he won't be mobile anytime soon, and Saturn describes Kizaru's work as sluggish compared to his usual standards, but he can understand why as he pans over to Luffy's body, implying Luffy was the reason. Before we talk about the second section of the fight, I do want to discuss a few things about this first round or slash portion of the fight. I want to talk about whether or not Luffy has been using a Conqueror's Infusion consistently in this fight, as I know it's kind of a dubious topic. The fight did start with Luffy doing a kick that I would say is undeniably infused with Conqueror's Haki, but the rest of the fight besides the Star Gun has no lightning present. Logistically, I think it makes more sense for Luffy to be using it against an opponent of Kizaru's caliber, especially if he started the fight using the ability. If you want a more grounded statement about Luffy's strength during the fight, in Weekly Shonen Jump 2024 issue 16, it says, Luffy and his crew attempt to escape from Egghead. Standing in their way are Admiral Kizaru and Saint Saturn, but there's no need for fear. They'll face them head on with all their strength, which implies that Luffy did use Conquerors on not only Kizaru but Saturn as well, if he is using all of his strength. The punches and attacks that we saw on screen were Luffy doing his best with them, and I think the community should, and already kind of is, get used to Oda not always drawing the Black Lightning in every single situation during a fight. Next, the next thing I want to talk about is Luffy's Vivre card and its description of Luffy during this fight. The timeline portion describes Luffy's rematch with Kizaru being a toe-to-toe fight that is on equal standing, if not in Luffy's favor. It confirms that within this specific fight, Luffy was the stronger of the two combatants, although Kizaru, like I said before, didn't utilize his maximum capabilities due to his mental state during the arc. The last thing I want to mention is Luffy's Gear 5 transformation and its mechanics during the fight. The Vivre card confirms that due to its immense power, Gear 5 puts a crazy strain on Luffy's body due to him not being able to handle it, which turns him into an old man. When Luffy fought Kaido, he was able to go back into Gear 5, but he wasn't able to on Egghead. I think the difference is that Kaido was fighting a Luffy whose body was already in a state that was bordering death, and the damage Kaido was doing to him caused the form to dissipate, as opposed to Kizaru, who essentially forced a battle of attrition with Luffy that completely sapped him of his short stamina window. So when Luffy got back up and resolved himself against Kaido, he was able to transform back due to having more stamina in the tank, but with Kizaru, he had a real extended fight where he couldn't maintain it. The condition of Luffy's body had a part to play in losing Gear 5 in the Kaido fight, which might be the reason why Luffy thought he hadn't reached his limit yet, stamina-wise, but he neglected the fact that his body was basically on life support. Returning to the fight analysis, Oda in the SBS basically comes right out and says that the one who gave Luffy food was Kizaru, which even more hammers home his whole confliction during the arc. This is crazy because Kizaru endured a Star Gun from Luffy and was able to get up and give Luffy food shortly after. He did imply in his internal thoughts that the Star Gun did damage him, but his defenses were able to take it and quickly rebound, which does make sense as Kizaru was the one that tossed Sentamaru the Rio defense that he claims is the best in the world. Once Luffy digests all the food, he hits Kizaru again, saying full tummy, full power, which means he's at full power once again. While Luffy is dealing with Saturn, Kizaru slips by Sanji and stabs Vegapunk, which is a pretty important moment in the fight. The Vivre card outlines that once Kizaru had killed his best friend, his mind had started to be pushed to his breaking point. Here, Luffy says the two of them aren't going anywhere, which shows he's trying to stop them both from following Vegapunk. Luffy claps them together with Dawn's symbol and says, "From now until the moment all my friends get away, I'm keeping you guys right here." He then throws them both away. Back at the beginning of the video, I said I was going to come back to Luffy throwing Kizaru when Gear 5 first came into the fight, and the reason I said that is because Luffy is making it clear here that his mission is to keep these guys away from his friends until they escape, as opposed to directly defeating them. The tactic of throwing Kizaru inside and away is the same exact tactic Luffy used against Kizaru when he threw him off the island initially, which shows he's just trying to keep them at bay, similar to how Rayleigh did during Sabaody. The fight is essentially Luffy acting as the Rayleigh of this arc that keeps Kizaru away from the Straw Hats as opposed to defeating him. Kizaru also doesn't return again after this, due to him reaching his breaking point like I said. He says he is deeply wounded, but the surrounding Marines can't seem to find any external wounds on him. The Viva card confirms that when he pierced the body of Vegapunk, he suffered a deep wound in his heart, which, like I've been saying, ultimately just cements the inner conflict even more. As he killed Vegapunk, his mental state worsened. So now I'll give an overview of the fight and my thoughts on who's really strong between these two. In terms of the fight itself, I've already said Luffy was the stronger combatant, and he was in the same role as Rayleigh before him, but taking into account Kizaru's inner conflict, you can make arguments for who was stronger than who. I've made this narrative argument in another video, but when Luffy is faced with Kuma, Sentomaru, and Kizaru in Sabaody, he claims that he and his crew can't beat these guys and that their only option is to run away. On Amazon Lily, he says he'll get stronger than all of them, and considering Egghead is a mirror of Sabaody, it makes sense for this arc to be him proving himself and that declaration. The way I see it, Luffy has more actual power than someone like Kizaru, whose attack power is nothing really to write home about, but the mechanics of Kizaru's combat style will always allow him to defeat someone like Luffy. Kizaru's fruit allows for intense evasion and movement, which allows him to draw out a fight with Luffy, which is a hard matchup counter to not only something like Gear 5, but even the Bash Ring Gun, which Kizaru can easily evade or get out of. He also has the durability through his armor and hockey to sandbag and endure Luffy's attacks, considering he can take a Star Gun to the dome and just keep it pushing. The Viewer card also does say that due to his experience, he can adapt to Gear 5 shenanigans. I do think overall, Luffy's probably the actual stronger combatant when he's in Gear 5, but his current limitations and Kizaru's specific skill set would allow him to defeat Luffy anytime they had a real fight. Even in this mentally afflicted nerf state, he's kind of just able to beat Luffy through just dodging and sandbagging his attacks. So depending on what you mean by stronger, you can really pick either side. I think a lot of people wanted this fight to be a definitive Yonko versus Admiral fight, but it just ended up not being that due to the constraints of an escape arc like Egghead, where Oda has clear intentions and motivations for certain characters, and none of them really set out to KO or defeat the other party directly.